Hello, everyone. Welcome to the San Juan Island Library. Thanks for joining us tonight. We are going to wait just a few minutes till we get started here, just to get everyone a chance to get logged in.
Does she stop talking?
All right, for those who just hopped in here, we're just waiting a few minutes to get started. Give everyone a chance to get into the meeting room. Thanks for your patience. All right, we'll give it just another minute here. Let those last few folks on in. All right, I think we can go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to the San Juan Island Library. My name is Sarah and I'm the Adult Programs Associate. And tonight we are very excited to be hosting McKayla Bauer for our Know Your Islanders series. First things first, I'd like to begin by thanking the Friends of the Library for their support of our programming. And before we get started, I would also like to take a moment to acknowledge that we reside on the traditional lands and waters of the Coast Salish people, past and present, and honor with gratitude the land itself and the people who have stewarded it through the generations. This calls us to commit to continuing to learn how to be better stewards of the land we inhabit as well. I have just a couple of housekeeping items for tonight. We are recording our program. If you prefer not to be recorded, we suggest that you keep your video turned off, or you're welcome to return at a later time to watch the recording, which will be available on our website. And there will also be a dedicated time for Q&A at the end of the program. If you have questions or comments, please feel free to enter those into the chat box at the bottom of your screen, and then we'll be happy to relay those to McKayla. Now just a little bit about McKayla. McKayla Bauer has spent most of her life in the mountains as a professional rock climber, PCT trail hiker, and more, where she summited peaks, traversed ridgelines, and climbed rock faces. These skills as a backpacker and climber, combined with her love of physics and adventurous spirit, culminated in owning a boat and picking up sailing as her latest adventure. Now she aims to be the first person to solo circumnavigate the globe on a San Juan sailboat. McKayla is here tonight to share how she is using her skills and adventures to raise visibility for her community and serve as an example of how you don't need money or all the classes in the world to live your dreams authentically. And McKayla, we're just so excited to have you here, and you can take it away when you're ready.
Thank you so much. Yeah, hello everyone, and welcome to my talk, how to accidentally learn how to sail around the world. Tonight we're going to spend some time talking about my life, my love for adventure, my self-realization, as well as some of the unintentional learning I have done along the way. I do want to add just a couple of disclaimers before I start my talk. The first being that you're going to see some photos of me tonight that don't look anything like I look now. That's okay, and it's not something that we need to comment on, the same way that photos from high school for you probably don't look the same way that you look now. And the second disclaimer completely just evaporated from my head. I would like to add the disclaimer, though, that even though this is called How to Accidentally Learn How to Sail Around the World, I have not sailed around the world yet. I do depart in less than 9 months to begin my circumnavigation. So tonight I want to talk to you about many of the experiences I've had throughout my journey through life that have led me to this place where I am both prepared, but also interested in taking on this endeavor. So there are a couple of questions that I want to start with. I was going to do them as a poll, but I actually think that it would be better if you just think about them going forward. And they're going to play into my talk some tonight. So firstly, who here struggled in school in some way? And I don't mean when I say struggled in school that you didn't get good grades. You can get great grades and still have struggled in school. In fact, I think a lot of people struggle in school because you were bored. I know that I personally was really bored in school. I aced 8th grade science. It might be the best grade I got in any of my classes throughout all of schooling. But I was so bored in that class that I spent most days sitting in the back of the classroom with my head down doing Sudoku puzzles. In fact, it was probably the first skill that I unintentionally mastered. And I do mean like really mastered. Like I never actually competed, but I was such a nerd that I kept up with competition times on competition puzzles. Okay, so second question. Who here feels a fear or an anxiety about walking into a situation that you don't have the complete set of skills in your tool bag for? I guess a follow-up to that is, who here feels comfortable in those situations? If any of you right now are thinking, yeah, I feel okay about those situations, then congratulations, that's a learned skill, and we're going to talk some tonight about how you can acquire that skill. My life has kind of been a blended amalgamation of these two concepts, unintentionally learning skills and then finding myself in situations where I have to lean upon this unintentionally learned skill set in order to cover for a skill that I maybe don't have. I can start with an example of this. When I was 11 years old, I went backpacking with my mom. This is where we backpacked to. This is Island Lake in Northern California. We were not there when there was this much snow on the ground. We hiked in the first day, and then the second day we went for a day hike. We hiked to this nearby peak. Very minimal gear, left most of it in camp because we were only going to be gone for maybe a total of 6 hours. Hiking back towards the camp, my mother, as a lesson for me, when we reached a split in a trail, asked which direction I thought we should go. I thought about what I remembered of hiking out that morning, and I chose a direction, and we took off down that trail. It quickly started descending, which is not something I had remembered from that morning. And we then reached a lake, which was not the lake that we had camped at. This is the direction that we should have gone. This is the direction that I suggested we go back. And when my mom then suggested that we were maybe on the wrong trail and we should turn around and take the correct trail, I insisted that if we just traversed these ridge lines, that we would be back at the camp where we'd camped. I think my mom deserves a lot of credit in this story. She was a real good sport and thought this would be a great learning lesson for me. And here I am telling this story later, so apparently it was. Because we exhausted ourselves for the next 4 hours traversing up and down 100 to 200 foot ridge lines until we did eventually arrive back at our camp. Now, some of you might call this stubbornness on my part. I prefer to call it covering for a skill that I didn't have by using a skill set that I did have. So the skill set that I did have was kind of this like basic understanding of knowing which direction we should go. The skill that I didn't have was really good land navigation skills. But the skill that I covered with was bushwhacking, and I was an excellent bushwhacker. This is some photos from my childhood. This is where I grew up. It's a little bit of land. It's maybe not the middle of nowhere, but it's like the middle of nowhere's next door neighbor. And I didn't have any siblings. I'm an only kid, and I didn't get along particularly great with the other neighbor kids. And so when I got bored, I would just pick a direction and walk, sometimes for hours before then turning around and coming back, and oftentimes bushwhacking through the wilderness because that was my backyard. I did come back from this trip with my mom though, and over the next several years, decade really, I did learn land navigation, very proficiently in fact. I began going on longer and longer hikes, eventually leading to hiking the Pacific Crest Trail. When I hiked in 2015, I used only paper maps. For those of you who aren't aware, that's actually not how most people hike the Pacific Crest Trail these days. There are really cool apps for your smartphone that will tell you if you're on the trail. If you're not on the trail, it will tell you how far you need to walk and what direction to get back to the trail. And it will tell you where upcoming landmarks are, such as trail crossings or road crossings, or even where you can refill your water. I did it without all of those, meaning that I have the skill set of being able to do a hike like this with just paper maps. Here's another photo from that hike. And that's not even a skill set that most PCT hikers have. Now, this didn't come out of a place of boredom the way that bushwhacking did. This more came out of a place of, I did the PCT on a serious shoestring budget. And in 2015, I was 23 years old and I actually didn't own a smartphone. So this was my option if I wanted to do this hike. But it's okay that I didn't own a smartphone and had to find another solution, because I learned pretty early in life that I really love problem solving. Back in school, it was mastering Sudoku. That was a great way of problem solving, but growing up, it quickly became rock climbing and spending time in the mountains. For those of you who have not spent significant parts of your life muddling your way up rock cliffs, the problem solving comes in the form of having to conform your body to use the holds that naturally exist in nature to move up the cliff face. It's kind of an addictive style of problem solving. It's why people get so hooked on rock climbing, because you're using your brain and your entire body to solve a problem. In fact, rock climbers call climbing routes problems. There's also this complete maze work of rope work that you have to learn and technique in order to keep both you safe and your climbing partner safe, but also haul and move gear around, keep others on the rock face safe, and to move efficiently up the cliff face. I wanted to go out climbing every weekend, but unfortunately that wasn't really a possibility. Now, I was really lucky to have supportive parents when it came to climbing. Many of my climbing friends now either got into it later in life, in college, or they had to hide it from their parents growing up. Mine made it accessible and often went with me. This is me at 12 years old in Moab in a climbing class that my mom had signed me up for. Because they did have a stipulation. If I was going to climb, I had to prove that I could do it safely. And I really appreciate that now, because it taught me how to go into dangerous situations in a safe, methodical, and cautious way. I struggled to find someone to go with me in the small town that I grew up in, because it's hard to find someone who wants a teenager as a climbing partner. I would oftentimes hang around the local outdoor gear shop, as that's where a lot of the people who I did know who climbed hung out. And one day, someone tossed a copy of this book, Mountaineering: Freedom of the Hills. Any of you who have spent time in the mountains probably own a copy. It is called The Mountaineer's Bible. The person who handed it to me told me to sit down and just start learning the techniques described in it. So I went home and I started reading, and that was only half of it. I also had to find a way to practically practice these skills that I was learning from this book. So then I was able to go out to this maple tree, this 40-foot tall maple tree in front of my grandparents' house that I grew up next door to, and try these techniques that I had only read about. This really connected the concept of being able to read about something and then go out and actually physically experience it in a way that I hadn't really experienced before. It also opened up the world of book learning for me, because me and textbooks in school never really meshed. It led to this kind of unstoppable feeling where I could add new skills to my toolbox, and it didn't even require me to have the hands-on experience. Of course, this has its limits, but the climber on the left eventually turned into the climber on the right. And I really did learn how to be safe in the mountains. And I got pretty lucky. I never really hurt myself along the way. I didn't think this slide was still in there. Continuing this idea of learning how to learn from books, though, I was always a band kid all through school. I played flute, saxophone, bassoon, contrabass, clarinet, piano. I even played some trumpet for a little while. And the reason I was able to pick up so many instruments was because at one point I learned how to play an instrument. And if you want to acquire a lot of skills that really open up just kind of a tremendous number of opportunities to you, at some point you have to learn how to learn. I unfortunately can't tell you what that is for you because it's different for every person. And I've tried describing how it works for me for people and it doesn't work for them the same way. However, there is a field that I think there's some really great literature on, and that's linguists. A lot of linguists will speak 7, 8, 9, even a dozen languages. And it's because they've learned how to learn languages. Okay, so rock climbing and mountaineering. Oh, this is where I'm supposed to transition back to my face. So rock climbing and mountaineering filled this love of problem solving for me, but it also was teaching me to push my abilities and myself. And I had other interests as well. And so I began devouring books on anything that I was interested in. So if, like me, you have a desire to just acquire as many skills as possible, I cannot highly recommend enough getting into the world of theater and theatrical production. Starting in high school, around the same time that I was spending all of my time rock climbing and spending tons of my time playing instruments, I was also getting really involved in the theater at my school. It was really cool. I could learn anything I wanted to do that happens in a theater. I could learn electrical wiring. I could learn how to design and build. I could learn engineering or costuming or makeup. There was even opportunities to learn people management and interpersonal skills. And every single show was an opportunity to work on a new skill. Even if you were doing the same thing as the last production, it's a new show with new actors and different demands and a different director and a different cast, and it all keeps you on your toes. So after school, I went on and I worked in the theater world professionally for years. It's a really fast-paced, high-stakes environment where everyone expects you to just get things done correctly the first time. I would walk into situations that I had never been in before, and I was just expected to know what I was doing. So I was always having to call back on these skills that I had picked up on other shows and apply them in new and creative ways. I can give an example of this. I kind of BS'd my way into this production job at a really huge company in Seattle. This company is known for having particularly spectacular techs, put on flawless productions, and charge companies like Microsoft, Amazon, and Xbox just an outrageous price tag to do so. Here's a photo of just one of the calls that I worked on to give kind of an idea of a scale. This was even a smaller ballroom for some of the productions that I did with this company. So the very first time I showed up for a call, needless to say, I was scared. I knew that I had to get everything done correctly the first time if I wanted to keep this job. So they put me on something really easy. They weren't dumb. They put me on a job that most theater techs have spent hours or possibly even days of their lives doing, and that's building truss. And what you see, that big series of pipework going down the middle of the photo, is a piece of truss. Now, truss building is really simple, but it is really high consequence. That thing goes up in the air with lights and speakers hanging from it. It's hung above people's head. And when things go wrong, they go really, really like headlines making wrong. Understandably, there's someone checking and double checking all this work that you do when you're assembling truss before it goes up in the air, but those people are riggers. And there are a few people as intimidating in the theatrical world as riggers because their jobs are so high staked. It's the high stakes that they take them incredibly seriously, and they have zero tolerance for someone who doesn't know what they're doing. So I knew that keeping my job at this company where I was being paid to do something that I really loved, like a ton of money to do it, depended on this simple task of building trust, something that my employers assumed that at this point I could do in my sleep, but I'd never built trust before. However, I knew a few things that I could bring to the table. Firstly, I knew that, here's just another example of truss. I knew that when you are cross tightening flush mount metal plates, so you can see closer to us than Angie in that photo there is where two pieces of truss meet. I knew that those needed to be tightened in diagonals. I had learned that with my grandfather as a kid when changing a tire on a truck. Same way that you tighten a truck tire in a star pattern, but here there's 4 bolts, so you go in a cross pattern. I also knew from just kind of my basic engineering background that truss bridges get their strength from the shape of the triangles. And so I knew that I had to preserve those triangles where 2 pieces of truss met. If you had flipped one of those over 180 degrees, they would be going parallel. I actually stopped another tech on that very first call from assembling a piece of truss wrong. So, sorry, I got distracted there for a second. I was able to lean on these past skills in order to accomplish this task correctly the first time. And that first day went pretty flawlessly. I did admit to a rigger privately that I had never done this before, before that piece of truss went up in the air. And they were very glad that I had told them. They were even more glad that I had done it correctly. Okay, so moving on just a little bit here, another really crucial step in trip planning, something like sailing around the world, is just trip planning. So back to that first story of getting lost with my mom. This was the first time I really had to start thinking about planning a trip like that. Not the getting lost part, but from the very beginning, both of my parents were really great about involving me in the trip planning process. This gave me a really great jumping off point, but logistical trip planning really came into its own for me when I was in my early 20s and I still wanted to go backpacking. But at that point, no one was taking me backpacking. I also didn't have my driver's license yet, but that wasn't about to stop me. And so I sat in front of my computer for weeks and I pored over bus routes and potential hiking trails at the end of these bus routes. I was living on Mercer Island at the time, and keep in mind that this was 2012, and so King County Transit, especially in remote areas, was not what it is today. If you also remember from earlier, this was before I owned a smartphone, and so I had to have every part of this plan nailed down and written down with plans B, C, and D all in place before heading out. I ended up stumbling upon this super remote little bus route in the middle of nowhere in the mountains above Carnation, which is a little town about 2 hours east of Seattle, and it only ran once a day. So my planning was pretty tight, but I figured I could do it. Figured out that if I did about 2 miles of road walking, I would then be at the entrance of this whole series of forest roads that are closed to public traffic. I had no idea the first time when I headed out there if I was going to be allowed to go hiking up there or if there would be anything to see, but I figured the worst thing that could happen is I would camp in some farmer's field and for the night, and then I'd just come back the next day. What I discovered there, though, was awesome. I went back a total of 5 times over the next 2 years. The berries in the summer and fall were incredible. The water is just absolutely beautiful. And I got to see stretches of the Tolt River that I don't think anyone has seen since the gold prospectors were up there. And my plan worked, which was a really important lesson for me. I began planning other backpacking trips, as we've talked about before, eventually leading to the Pacific Crest Trail. Here's a glimpse at my spreadsheet for my gear management system for the Pacific Crest Trail, as well as my resupply spreadsheet. As you can see, I was a bit of a planner. But do you remember earlier when I asked if you feel comfortable going into a situation where you don't have the complete skill set and how that's a learnable skill? Guatemala is where I learned that skill. It was not my plan to move to Guatemala, but I had fallen in love and it was the plan of my partner. And so I followed her down there. I was not prepared. I did not feel comfortable. I didn't speak any Spanish. I had never traveled to a developing nation, and I was still really financially recovering from my PCT hike. I had no idea how I was going to go about finding a job once I was down there. You can see, you just saw the meticulous spreadsheet that I made for hiking the PCT, and I couldn't do that with this trip. There was just too much that was totally unknown, not to mention just how long we were going to live down there for. This step away from this detailed, scrutinized planning was really terrifying for me, but I went. And you know what? It worked. I made my finances work. I found a job. It's one of the most incredible experiences in my life. This led me to have the confidence to put my planning skill along with a degree of winging it together to tackle bigger projects. I left Guatemala and I returned to the US, and I went on to Nordic ski the High Sierra Mountains in California. In an age of high-tech alpine skis, I am, to my knowledge, the only person to have Nordic skied the High Sierras in modern times, and I did it solo. Likely the unknowns would have kept me from feeling safe before. The unknowns of river crossings, of what snow conditions were going to look like. There were no trail reports coming down from that period of time that year. I was the first person to go up there. But after Guatemala, I had this new ease in unknown situations, and I was sure that all of my mountaineering experience would keep me safe. I continued to put together bigger and bigger trips that utilized all these skills together, which has really prepared me for taking on the circumnavigation. But before we get onto the boat, there's one more skill set that was crucial to preparing me for sailboat ownership. I have learned over and over again, be it at home or a workplace, that it's really crucial for my own productivity needs to make spaces fit my needs. An example of that is you're sitting on stacks of printer paper tonight because I needed the computer that much higher. Another example is when I took a job doing a tremendous amount of data entry, I got the company to let me use my own laptop because it was a keyboard that I was super familiar with. In theater production, I really viewed it as a perk that I could work whatever hours I wanted, just as long as the job got done. I would oftentimes be at the theater from 10 p.m. to 8 a.m. I was in my early 20s. I don't think that that same time frame would be considered a perk for me today. In 2018, I took this idea of making a space your own, and I applied it to my very stylish 1996 Isuzu Rodeo. A lot of my friends in climbing had added a removable bed platform to their vehicles, and I thought this was a super cool idea, but not quite my speed. I fully committed, completely removing the back seats and building a whole new infrastructure, including drawers and a kitchen. I remember, as I look at this photo, clambering in and out of the bed platform, which is the lower platform on the right side of this photo. I designed it so that I would have 8 inches of space above my head when I was laying on my back sleeping. I figured that that would be, well, coffin-like, comfortable enough for me. What I didn't think about is just how difficult that would be to get in and out of. But I made it work, and this vehicle allowed me to do some really cool things. I was able to go winter camping, and I was able to go winter rock climbing. I stayed in this car at ski spots in order to catch that first chair up in the morning. These are all things that wouldn't work just sleeping in a tent next to my car. I needed this this style of build out. So it was a great first test piece in building a challenging space, and it translated really well to dealing with the curved sections when I was doing some work in the boat. So we should probably talk about that part, because a crucial step of accidentally learning how to sail around the world is accidentally stumbling into sailing. For me, sailing had always been a dream. I grew up traveling once a year, every other year, to Mexico, where my uncle had a very fancy boat that stayed in a very fancy marina that cost a lot of money. That made this whole idea feel very unattainable to me. I never thought I would get into sailing. Swirl wasn't the first boat I had looked at, but it was the first boat I ever looked at seriously, because I didn't have all this money or skill or connections that I thought you had to have to live this dream, as this was my only experience previously with sailing. But inexpensive boats like mine, Swirl, happen all the time. I actually found Swirl because I needed somewhere to live. I had moved in with a friend after a relationship ended, and after about 6 weeks of being there, the roof in my room started to leak, and that led to the end of that rental arrangement. I began couch surfing, staying with other friends, going camping every weekend up in the mountains. I had my super cool Azusa rodeo after all. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. I had a good job, had money and savings. I could have found somewhere to live without too much hassle, but I knew I was looking for something different. Most of my friends were climbers and they had all built out vans so they could tour all of the best climbing spots in the country and live super cheap out of their vans. The right van just hadn't come along. And it just so happened that one of my friends came into my place at work one day and said, "Hey, McKayla, are you still homeless?" Which is an embarrassing thing to have shouted across a shop, regardless of the fact that your employer and your coworkers are aware of your situation. But I said, yes, I am. And he asked if I was interested in living on his sailboat as more of a rental situation. And I said, probably not interested in renting it, but I might be interested in buying it. And he said he was interested in selling it to me. And so we came to an arrangement. And January 1st, 2020, I took over the boat. I did decide that if I was going to own a sailboat, I was going to sail it. And so once again, I was able to take techniques that I had only read about and then go out on an actual boat and make it go with just the wind, which is a really cool feeling. Little did I know in that moment that I was about to take that same boat on this huge trip starting next year. What I quickly learned about boating as I began working on projects on the boat is that for me, it was this really wonderful way to apply all these skill sets that I had. And I didn't even know that I was looking for something that could like utilize all my different skills. But once I found it, it kind of felt like I had found my calling. And yeah, I'd just been given this beautiful home. And my first instinct was to start tearing it apart and changing it for my own design. But what I didn't know at the time, and part of the reason I've completely fallen in love with sailing, is this is actually a pretty common thing. There's no such thing as a complete sailboat. You can go out and spend $500,000 on a brand new sailboat, and it's going to need customization when it arrives. Most circumnavigators actually prefer older boats for this reason. They're built really strong, they tend to be affordable, and you can do so much customization work to make the boat exactly what you want. So some of you, I imagine, showed up to this talk tonight because sailing around the world is maybe something that you are interested in doing. And so I'll get into the nitty-gritty just for a moment about what you need for a boat that you can sail around the world in. Now, a lot of people have given this mini hour-long lecture before me who are better suited to do it, so this is just going to be a highlight reel. The first thing you need to do is figure out if you have the skills and abilities to go and look at the boat, or if you need to bring someone better versed along. And if you're questioning this at all in your head, you need to bring someone better versed. There are a lot of things that can be wrong with a boat that aren't worth fixing. Almost anything can be fixed, but there are a lot of things that aren't worth it. Hull deformation, severe blistering below the waterline, and rotten deck coring are all examples of things that if you just go look at a boat, you're likely not going to be able to tell that any of those are wrong, and almost always none of them are worth fixing. Don't be discouraged though, take someone along who knows how to tell if those things are wrong, and if they say that things look okay, then start looking at what else needs to be fixed, because most affordable boats have something. But do you know a lot about woodwork? Then don't be intimidated by some tired or outdated or even mildly damaged interior woodwork. Can you wire some basic electrical outlets? Don't be intimidated if the boat needs a little rewiring, or if you need to add solar. A lot of boats need that. You and your circumnavigation vessel are going to become intimately acquainted, so don't be afraid to just get in there. This is because sailing revolves around the fact that you are not good enough on your own. It is a relationship between you and your boat, because you are not strong enough to trim sails without winches. You cannot raise and hold sails aloft without cleats or clutches. And you are not strong enough, tall enough, or enduring enough to make that boat go without a mast to hold the sails up. The entire thing is a relationship between you and your boat. So tweak, customize, and rebuild to make it fit your needs. Or you can be like me and take it to the whole next level. I got pretty lucky where I didn't have anything severely wrong with the boat, but I did gut the entire thing. Yeah, I've been all over this entire boat. honestly every inch of it several times at this point, and anything that I questioned at all, I replaced. So as you might be able to tell from these photos, the woodwork was a little outdated, a little bit rotten in places, and so it all got replaced. One place where I had doubts was the electrical wiring. It worked, but I wasn't completely sure. And so you can see on the picture on the right there, I tore out 500 feet of electrical wire and replaced it with brand new modern tinned copper wire. And now I fixed it. And so if something does go wrong, chances are I can fix it again. Let's see, this is along the building process. I'll just take a sip of tea and let people look at those photos for a second. And then this is the finished build. It's also my own design. I wasn't satisfied with just rebuilding what was there before. I wanted a bigger galley section, and I wanted a fridge. Swirl didn't originally have a refrigeration system. And so yeah, one of the other things that I did was customization, but also preventative work. The rigging on Swirl is a prime example of that. These are pictures from repainting the deck, but you can also see in the left picture some new rigging that I added. Swirl is a very aggressive boat. And what I mean by that is she was designed with one purpose in mind, and that is to go fast. Both safety and comfort were secondary to speed. So to make her both safer and more comfortable for the circumnavigation, I radically changed the sail plan for this boat, adding a whole new stay in order to add a whole new set of sails that are smaller for when the wind is stronger. Here I am at the top of the mast. That's the day that I replaced some of the rigging. I also stepped up all the size by a 32nd of an inch, which with steel rigging actually makes it quite a bit stronger. So she's even better suited for offshore conditions. And then in the photo on the right, not the mainsail, but the smaller sail in front of it that you can see just a little bit of, that's the new sail flying on that new stay that I added. This included not just designing the new rigging. I did all the design work by myself, but also the actual installation, as you can see there. Not to mention purchasing the parts. When you come up with things out of your own head, sometimes the parts that you want just don't exist, or they exist in the most obscure of places. I actually had to import a part from Europe because I knew in my head what I wanted, but I couldn't find anyone in the US who made that part. But it came from a very well-known, reputable mast manufacturer in Europe. Luckily, it only took about 3 months to get here. When you're solo sailing, when you're offshore, you are your only resource. You have to be your own navigator, your own engineer, physicist, doctor, problem solver, and repair staff. So I guess at the beginning of this, when I said I was going to talk about how to accidentally learn how to sail around the world, this is what I meant. I didn't set out with the goal to become a solo circumnavigator. It's not even why I initially got the boat, but I've acquired the skills that I need to take on this project. You know, I learned to rig from theater and climbing. I learned physics from climbing. I learned emergency medicine from my time mountaineering as well as guiding. And well, I learned engineering just kind of from all of it. But I've learned the crucial skill of learning how to learn and learning how to problem solve. And those two fit so hand in hand. So much of problem solving is knowing how to learn how to adapt that skill, adapt that existing skill to meet a new challenge. And I feel very prepared now to take on whatever comes during the circumnavigation. There is one last big thing you need to sail around the world. You need a reason. A lot of people are after the adventure, the travel, the challenge, but when you're beating upwind and a storm and the boat is uncomfortable and you can't sleep, much less make a hot meal, you need to have something deep down that's going to keep you from just selling your boat at the next port. Now, if you don't believe me on this, just look at how many boats are for sale in Hawaii. People get there and say, forget this, I'm selling the boat. I have several drives. I do want the adventure. I want to see the South Pacific atolls. I want to stop for tea on St. Helena Island. It's this little island in the middle of the Atlantic that's owned by England. It's actually where they exiled Napoleon Bonaparte to, and France still owns his house there. A huge drive of mine is a love for slow travel. We've talked a lot about my PCT hike, but that's not just it. I've also skated thousands of miles on a skateboard with a backpack on my back. I've spent time hiking other big trails. I love this idea of traveling slowly for long periods of time. More than all those, though, I want to further the accomplishments of the trans community. I am a trans woman, and when I was coming out, one of the most important things was seeing other people like me who had transitioned and were similar to myself. There's this trans rock and ice climber. She's amazing. I don't know if I would have transitioned without her, but I was able to see this very out, public, and well-known, at least in the world of climbing, person who was living the life that I wanted to live. This is so important, and this is my chance to be that for someone else. No trans person has ever circumnavigated before. And in a period in our country where my very right for existence is so regularly challenged and politicized, it is so important for us trans folks to continue to push our visibility, to prove that we're not going to go away just because someone else would find it convenient. And sure, I do this for the visibility of my entire community, but it's not even really it. I do this trip for that one trans kid who's always dreamed of sailing around the world, who's still in the closet and worries that coming out and living authentically would ruin their chances of that dream. I do this trip to them to prove that there is a better future in store, free from all those headlines, where we can just celebrate and be ourselves. You want to accidentally learn how to sail around the world? Just start acquiring skills. Learn everything you can, because you never know when you're going to stumble into something someday that's going to tie all those skills together. But the real key is finding that driving purpose in life and to keep your eyes open for the opportunity to embrace the project that ties it all together. Thank you all so much for having me talk here. Just last slide, if you want to follow along on my journey, is some of the places that you can do that. I'm going to drink some tea for a second while Sarah tells me what's next.
Thank you, McKayla, for sharing all of your amazing adventures and learning experiences. We have reached the Q&A period of our program. And so I just want to invite folks, if you have a question or comment that you'd like to share, please feel free to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask McKayla directly, or you can enter it into the chat box. And I do see here, McKayla, we have one question in the chat box. Have you learned chart and celestial navigation and how to read weather?
Yeah, I have a lot of weather skills from times in the mountain. I am taking a celestial navigation course through a sailing school in San Francisco online this winter. And I do know how to navigate by charts.
McKayla, I have a question, and that was quite a lovely path you took us along of your evolution, your development. It's really fun to see.
Thank you.
This time of year, November, is usually the time you can get a little bit of heavy weather sailing in these waters. Have you had a chance to let Swirl feel some significant wind, and how does she respond?
Yeah, I did quite a bit of sailing through the last 2 winters. I went on a 300-mile sail in the beginning of 2021 in February, while we had all that snow that year and some pretty strong winds. What I haven't done is taken her out with the new sail plan in those conditions, and that is something that will definitely happen this winter.
Mm-hmm.
But to answer your question of how she handles, she's a small fin-keeled boat. If you're a sailor, you have an idea of what that means. She doesn't handle heavy weather as well as a full keel boat does. She doesn't heave to very well, but I do have a series drogue, which is the more modern way of dealing with those real heavy weather situations. So I have that to use. Can always trail warbles, which is just the process of trailing long, like 300-foot lines behind you. And I do have 2 different sizes of storm soul as well.
Well, we hope to hear more as you fully prepare, and then perhaps you'll somehow update your web as you get off to to places that I hope mostly are downwind.
That's the plan. Thank you.
McKayla, here's a very important question. Are you taking your cat?
I am very hopeful to be able to take my cat. I recently received some sad news from the French government in regards to being able to enter French Polynesia with him, but their suggestion was to change some of my wording in my application and reapply. And so I have done that and I'm waiting to hear. But regardless of if he comes with me or not, he has a very good, safe, loving home, actually with my mother to stay in if he's not able to come. But right now the plan is yes, he's gonna come. He does pretty well with sailing, so.
Very fun. And then when do you plan to begin your journey and which direction are you planning on sailing?
Yeah, my last commitment, saying when I was going to start hiking the Pacific Crest Trail was easy. I had a permit for April 11th. Saying when I'm going to start sailing around the world is a little harder because it's so dependent on weather. My last commitment is July 29th next year. And the plan is to take off as soon as I can after that and pretty much beeline for Panama because I want to cross the Pacific next year, which means I need to be in Panama by the end of October at the very latest. And then from Panama, I will set off westbound. And so sail across the Pacific immediately, and then I'll end up ending back at Panama.
Okay, what is the longest time you'll be at? I have a few questions here.
Yeah.
What is the longest time you'll be at sea? Are you worried about being alone all that time? How will you combat that? And how often will you call your mother?
You probably guess who that's from. I will call my mother as often as I am able, which will mean when I am in countries that I can call her from. I will have the ability to text with my mother on a much more regular basis, even when in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. The longest passage will be crossing the Pacific. The second longest passage will be crossing the Indian Ocean. The Pacific should take about 30 to 45 days at the longest end in my boat. And then, so I was asked this question on a podcast interview not too long ago of how I was going to deal with the loneliness. And my answer to that person, just pretty much my answer here, is I've never been alone for what I felt like was a long enough period of time. Hopefully it doesn't sound too antisocial to say. It's not like I don't like people, but I do really like my alone time. And going up and in the mountains, the longest you can usually get out for is a couple of weeks if you stash food somewhere along the way. Whereas, you know, this is gonna be very different. It's gonna be potentially a month and a half. The things that I learned on the Pacific Crest Trail that were very helpful for me is I felt a lot less lonely if I had conversations to listen to, and I got into podcasts a lot more at that point. And so I plan on having a whole bunch of my favorite podcasts downloaded, taking a bunch of books to read. You know, to some extent, sailing is kind of boring. It's a lot of sitting around while the boat moves itself with brief moments of absolute sheer panic when something has to be changed or done with the sails. But I think that there will be enough to do, just in tending with the boat, day-to-day chores, and all of that.
You keep him busy.
Yeah.
Do you carry both a dinghy and a life raft?
I will, yes.
How will you sleep?
That is an excellent question, because sailing solo, that's the question, is when do you sleep? So if you are out bobbing around in the middle of the ocean and all you can see is water around you in every direction, and you poke your head up, and on the very edge of the horizon there is a pinprick size ship that is in fact a cargo container ship, it's about 20 minutes until that boat hits you if you're on a collision course. It happens that fast. When you're on a sailboat and you're only, you know, when you're standing up on the sailboat, you're only 8 feet off the water in my boat. you can only see about 37 miles. And so that's about how fast it happens, is 20 minutes. So you sleep in 20-minute intervals. There are also, in some places there are designated traffic patterns for large ships like that. And you have a very low chance of running into, like extremely low chance of running into one if you're on those traffic paths. But even places where there aren't traffic paths, most ships take more or less the same route across the Pacific. And as a small sailboat, I can avoid those areas. So there will be some places where I'm able to sleep for an hour at a time, but most of it is going to be 20 minutes. You get, 20-minute nap, you get up, you poke your head out, everything is fine. You sleep for 20 more minutes, you poke your head up. And then the last part, the kind of secret weapon, is I will have AIS on board. It stands for Automatic Indication System, or Identification System. All big boats, any boat bigger than 60 feet, are required by law to have them, but it's a really good safety part for smaller boats. So it tells bigger boats that I'm a sailboat, so I have the right of way, as well as what speed I'm making on what course. It does still require someone to be awake in the chart room, in the navigation station of one of those big ships, and to see that I am on a collision course with them. And every once in a while, very, very rarely do boats get hit. But every once in a while, I know people who have stories of like, yeah, I was on a collision course with that boat. And I think that if I hadn't hailed them on the radio and woken the person up, they wouldn't have changed course. And then those systems do also have a built-in alarm. So there's a physical loud alarm that goes off if I am on a collision course with a boat that's going to come within 10 miles of me.
Wow. Where are you starting from?
That last commitment on July 29th is in Anacortes. So I'll start from Anacortes pretty much.
Right around here.
Yeah.
Do you have to prepare for that kind of sleeping schedule?
To some extent, but during the winters, during really bad storms, I'll keep kind of that same sleeping schedule. I don't have the boat in a marina. I live on anchor. And so during big storms during the winter, I'll keep about that sleep schedule anyway. A lot of my time, especially mountaineering, I have a lot of experience with pushing my body extremely physically hard, but also doing it on little sleep or sleeping really unusual hours. Sailors also will tend to sleep during the day, solo sailors, because your boat's a lot easier to see during the day than it is at night. So that'll be a technique I use. And then basically whenever the weather is calm and things are good, you sleep as much as you can. And you kind of try to bank that sleep for then when things are rough or you're in higher traffic areas.
McKayla, do you have a sense of how long your journey will be?
Yeah, so I'm going pretty quick. A lot of circumnavigations, 5 years is kind of considered a quick circumnavigation. 10 years is kind of more of a standard circumnavigation. I'm planning on going in 15 to 19 months from Panama to Panama. My boat isn't fast enough to do the entire globe in one storm cycle. It's not even fast enough to do it in 2 storm cycles, but I think it's fast enough to do it in 3 storm cycles. So essentially what that means is, like, because storms, if you have storms in the southern hemisphere, usually the northern hemisphere is pretty good sailing, and vice versa. And so I will have to bounce back and forth over the equator a few times to avoid those storms. And so that's kind of what I mean by storm cycles, is that's how many I need to get around.
Any other questions for McKayla? Will you sail offshore of whale migratory routes and hotspots?
Well, so I plan on going around the Cape of Good Hope, not through the Strait of Gibraltar. And so that's where there is a lot of, I don't want to say issues. I mean, I guess the phrase the scientists use is there is a new orca behavior there, where orcas have been attacking sailboats, especially my size sailboat. I will not be going anywhere near that area. As far as other whale hotspots or migration areas, there's not too much that I can do to avoid. I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, I'm not going to be sailing well out of my way. If there is a concern somewhere, I will avoid it. But otherwise, I am a sailboat. I won't have a prop that's spinning. There's not a lot that I'm going to do to disrupt them too much.
How can we support your travels and receive updates about your journey?
Yeah, I'll put that last slide back up again. And for anyone who wants to take a photo or screenshot of it, these are the best places to follow along with me. If you want to support my journey and get involved with the first trans person circumnavigation, it's the first openly queer person to circumnavigate solo. My boat is a 1977 San 130 custom cutter rig. I don't think I ever actually said exactly what Swirl is, but she'll be the first San Juan class to sailboat to circumnavigate. If you want to get involved and support that, patreon.com/SV Swirl is the best place to do that. There are options starting at just $3 a month. That's where I post a lot of the media content for the trip, and you have a real active part in helping make this happen. If you want to see pretty photos or some video content, both Instagram and YouTube, I'm pretty active on. And then the one place where you can find all of the links to everything that I'm active on, as well as regular updates and whatnot, is my website, which is whoismckaylabauer.com.
Awesome. Any final questions for McKayla? McKayla, thank you so much for sharing. Just want to wish you the best of luck, and I'm very excited to follow along, and maybe we'll be lucky enough to have you back to tell how the journey went when you're all finished.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you everyone who came.
All right, good night everybody. Thanks for joining us.